Today I'm going to show you how I made this decorative bookshelf, and I did it with one power tool and a couple of accessories. I had a leftover piece of plywood that was about 6 inches wide, so I started cutting out my pieces on it. For simplicity, both side legs and the middle shelf are going to be 15 inches long. At those 15-inch marks, I made a guideline to follow using a speed square. And to get a clean cut, I put some painter's tape over it before cutting it with the circular saw. I'm using a speed square here to guide the circular saw so that it's a perfect 90-degree cut. Circular saws can be a little rough sometimes, so using that painter's tape is a great way to make sure you don't get tear out, which looks like this. Something I like to do instead of measuring 3 independent 15-inch cuts is make that first cut, then use that same board to mark a reference line for your next cut. This is going to ensure that all your boards are the exact same size. After that, I marked the inside and the outside of the legs. Generally, you put the nicer wood on the outside because it's a little more visible. If there are flaws on the inside, the books will probably hide them. On the inside, at about the halfway point, I marked another reference line, and this is going to be for the shelf. Align another board with that reference line you just drew, and then draw another line. This is going to indicate the thickness of our shelf. I set the cutting depth on my circular saw to about 3/8 of an inch. Locking this into place ensures that the circular saw doesn't cut through the entire piece, but only goes 3/8 of an inch deep. Using those middle shelf lines that we marked out a moment ago, you can start removing material using the circular saw. Use the speed square to control your cut and keep moving along between the two lines in light passes. It also helps to use a chisel in order to clean up some of that space. Eventually, you're going to create enough space for that middle shelf to fit. I quickly applied the same logic on the other side, and that gives you your 2 legs and middle shelf. As long as you're careful with your cuts, that middle shelf should fit in perfectly. Now, remember that middle shelf has a divider. I set that divider at about 10 inches, just so it's a little off to the side. I marked out that main line using a speed square. Then I marked the secondary line using another board just like last time. This area that we're setting up here goes under the middle shelf because it's for that divider that we were talking about. And that pretty much concludes all the cuts, so we're making good progress here. If you've been enjoying this process so far, or if this video has been helpful, please feel free to like and subscribe. It's free and it helps grow the channel so I can keep making cool projects like this. When it's possible, I like to sand my boards before the assembly. Everything's just more accessible that way. And I know I said one power tool, but you can also hand sand this if you want to. I tested the fitment one more time, then I moved on to the gluing process. And this is as simple as spreading some wood glue into all the grooves. I made sure these had a tight fit, and that alone is enough to hold the piece together while the glue dries. If you want some extra reassurance, you can also use these cheap 90-degree clamps. It was like $12 for a set of 4, and they have a clamping mechanism that holds everything in place. And in my testing, they worked pretty well. That's 90 degrees right there. Clean up that extra wood glue while you have a chance. You'll thank yourself later. The next day, I needed to account for that middle divider. I marked a cut line that matched the other 2 legs, then I cut that board to size, and I clamped it into place with some wood glue, just like last time. Now we're going to put in that back support for that middle shelf. Sticking to the theme of one power tool, you can measure this out, add a little bit of glue, and it'll stay in place. You're not putting much weight on this, and wood glue is really strong. If you do have some power tools though, you can always drill some pocket holes into this backside and just face those pocket holes in the direction of the other boards. If you use a solid wood board, you don't have to worry about this. But I used plywood, so I'm using some iron-on edge banding to give the appearance of real wood. And this really is as simple as ironing the edge banding into place and then trimming off the excess. If you do go this route, my advice would be to test this out on a few scrap pieces and get the feel for it. I used medium heat, and while a lot of this is fast forwarded, just be sure to take your time. I let these dry out for like 10 minutes, and then I moved on to wood stain. This is Varathane's Golden Oak, and it's one of my favorites. There's not much rhyme or reason to this process. You just rub the stain on, and once the wood has soaked up enough of it, you can just wipe it off. And for some added protection, I used Varathane's water-based polyurethane. With a foam brush, move along in light passes going in one direction. I usually aim for 3 coats with about 15 minutes of drying time in between. After that, you're all set.